The open forum, where diverse and difficult opinions can be freely expressed. Where issues that are brushed under the carpet are openly discussed. Our journey entails starting conversations around issues that the world is turning a blind eye to. Let the story be told by the sufferer himself or herself. Unravel the politics behind the silence, by bringing the stakeholders on one platform and keep pushing for resolutions. The open forum, where resolution meets resolve, and silence is heard.
Good evening and welcome to this open forum debate on the plight of Uyghur women. My name is Emma Murphy. I'm the US correspondent for ITV News, and it's my pleasure to be invited to host this evening's open forum event. Now, over the years, I have covered the plight of the Uyghur population along with colleagues around the world. And in preparation for tonight's event, I watched a piece by a BBC colleague, Matthew Hill. It's an incredibly powerful piece of television which documents claims of abuse from a number of women who were held in Chinese camps. Now, the Chinese government described these camps as education vocational training centres. Of course, those who've been held in them describe them as detention centres. When I watched this piece, I was struck by one particular quote spoken by one of those people that Matthew Hill interviewed. Let me read that quote to you. The woman who spoke said, "They don't only rape, but also bite all over your body. You don't know if they are human or animal." Now, those words have lived with me since I saw that piece, and they form the background to our discussion this evening. Now, the Chinese government, of course, deny all these allegations, and we have to make that clear at this point. The event tonight is aimed at raising awareness about the plight of the Uyghur people and drawing on the expertise of people from around the world who have worked on this project and on also the situation facing the Uyghurs for many, many years. They are supporters of the Open Forum movement and also of the Uyghur people. Let me introduce you to those contributors who we'll be hearing from this evening. First of all, we're joined by Baroness Verma. She is a Conservative peer since 2006 and former Minister of Energy, Climate and International Development. She's currently chair of the EU Goods Committee and also the UN's Women's Committee. Thank you for joining us, Baroness Verma. Along with Baroness Verma, we have Rahima Mahmut, who is a Uyghur campaigner. She's a musician, a songwriter, and also a real advocate for the Uyghur population. We've worked closely together over the past years, haven't we, Rahima? She's also a member of the Interparliamentary Alliance on China, IPAC, and has worked on a number of award-winning documentaries on the situation of the Uyghur people. Our third contributor tonight is Baroness Helena Kennedy QC, Labour peer and expert in human rights, who many of you will have come to know over the years. She's president of the School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London, and she's received honours for her work on human rights by many universities and also governments around the world. She is a vocal campaigner for Uyghur rights. And then finally, last but not least, Professor Rachel Harris. She's a professor of ethnomusicology at SOAS, also in London, and her research is centred on China and the Uyghurs. She's over 20 years studied this situation, and she's conducted field work not only in Xinjiang, but in Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan. So welcome to you all, and thank you very much for your time today. You will hear from all of our contributors over the next hour, but perhaps it's important that we start first of all with that BBC report, which I referred to by Matthew Hill, to really put in mind exactly what it is we are discussing this evening.
There's been international condemnation of China after the BBC reported claims that women in so-called re-education camps for the Uyghur Muslim minority are being raped and tortured. The British and US governments are now calling on Beijing to allow independent investigators into the camps. Matthew Hill has spoken to several former detainees for his report, and you may find some of their accounts distressing.
Terzanai Zaiwuddin is reliving a story she can barely bring herself to tell. She was held at one of Xinjiang's so-called re-education camps. These satellite images show the site where Terzanai says she was held, sharing a cell with 13 other women. She's haunted by one image: masked men coming down a camp corridor like this one after midnight.
They were 3 men. Not one, but 3. They did whatever evil their mind could think of, and they didn't spare any part of my body, biting it to the extent that it was disgusting to look at. They had an electric baton. I didn't know what it was. It was pushed into my private parts, and I was tormented with electric shocks.
Han Chinese men would pay money to have their pick of the pretty young inmates. My job is to remove their clothes and then handcuff them on their beds so they cannot move.
The testimony of the women we've interviewed has sparked international condemnation. The US State Department said the atrocities they describe shock the conscience. And tonight, President Biden has revealed human rights in China will be a priority for his administration. Here too, in Parliament today, the treatment of the women was condemned by the Foreign Office.
The evidence of the scale and the severity of these violations is now far-reaching. It paints a truly harrowing picture. If China wishes to dispute this evidence, then it must allow unfettered access to the region for the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights or another independent fact-finding body.
China has responded to our investigation, insisting its camps are vocational training centres designed to stop Muslims living in the region from turning to extremism. It accuses the BBC of lies and misinformation.
There is no so-called systemic sexual assault and abuse against women. China is a country ruled by law. Our constitution guarantees and protects human rights, and it is embodied in our legal system and the government's work.
Well, I'm sure you will agree with me that was incredibly powerful testimony and an extremely disturbing report. Now, the next broadcast that we'll see is something that I worked on along with colleagues in Turkey, and it is also testimony from a woman who lived and worked in China. She was working as a doctor and claims that she was asked to carry out work that she believes was effectively genocide.
It is part school, part orphanage, and for many of these children it is the only home they have. They don't know if their parents are dead or alive, because they are amongst the million Uyghurs who have vanished into Chinese government internment camps.
Today is a good day. Today is a good day.
Their children have freedom because most were taken from China to Turkey by relatives.
How difficult is it to not be with your family?
It's like a unknown feeling, and I can say it's so hard, like when you say
For all their heartbreak, history may write of these children as the lucky ones, as survivors of a genocide. China stands accused of seeking to eradicate the Uyghur population, and some of the accusations come from those who now claim to have helped that cause. This doctor is speaking out to try and right the wrongs of her past. She says back home in China she spent her career performing forced abortions on women from her community or sterilising them on behalf of the Chinese government.
In 20 years, I participated in at least 500 to 600 operations, including forced contraception, forced abortion and sterilization, and forced removal of wombs.
Hers is horrific testimony, which stands at odds with her medical oath to do no harm, but fits with a birth rate which has fallen 60%.
We'd go village to village, gather all the women and herd them onto tractors. Young women were fitted with contraceptive devices. Pregnant women would have to have an abortion, then sterilization. We even inserted birth control implants into women's upper arms to prevent pregnancy. This is how the government persecuted the Uyghur women.
She eventually fled to Turkey, and it was there she told me about abortions carried out at full term, babies born alive then killed by injection, others thrown away whilst in the final moments of life.
The clear intention was ethnic cleansing. We were asked to believe this was part of the Communist Party's population control plan. At the time, I thought it was my job. I felt sorry to see the killing of a small baby, but I never fully realized its damage to the nation. Now I feel such regret.
And so she helps those who also fled, but suffer different regrets.
Ondan keyin özükni ağız etdi, pərviş qısa, tuğdu. Türkten bilməyən qarindaşlar cıq, Türkten bilməyən. Bu Uyghur doktor mügülü doktorun bu yerdə bağını imtahin xürsənmə.
Kalbinur Kamal is now safe in Turkey, having smuggled her daughter out of China. Her first child was forcibly taken from her body. She hid her next pregnancy. Turkey offers sanctuary to those who had to leave their homeland, but the horrors of their past and fears for their people and their futures never leave them. Emma Murphy, News at 10, Istanbul.
So there you have two reports to put the discussion we're about to have into context. And I should repeat again, the Chinese government deny all the allegations made both in the BBC piece and the ITV News report. So this evening's discussion, I think we'll start with Professor Rachel Harris. Professor Harris, you have studied for more than 20 years this situation. I'd be interested if you would start tonight's debate by just bringing us up to speed with your insights.
Thank you very much, Emma. I'd like to start just by pulling back a bit from the horror of the present day and talking a little bit about my long experience in this region. I've been working there for over 25 years. I've travelled extensively. I've lived for long periods in the cities and in the rural areas. And over the past 10 years, I've been working on a project about Uyghur religious life. So I spent time working with village women, living with these women, recording their life stories and taking part in all the daily life of the village. So learning how to sweep the yard, how to chop carrots and how to make hand-pulled noodles, all that. So the Uyghur women that I worked with so extensively, they are some of the most marginalized in Chinese society. They have this triple disadvantage. They're minority people, their gender disadvantages them, and of course their place in the rural areas. So they're often regarded as backward, uncivilized, superstitious, or baby-making machines, as per a Chinese official tweet recently. So I have always found it very important to record their voices, to listen to their voices and really engage with what they're saying. Their voices were at the heart of the book that I published last year. And I think that now really what I want to emphasize today is the importance of really listening to the testimonies of the women that we're hearing on news reports, such as you've just heard there. So I myself stopped getting visas for China in 2013, probably because even at that time, researching Islam was already a problem for the authorities. I haven't seen those women for 8 years at least, I haven't been able to contact them at all for the past 3 to 4 years, since phoning abroad became one of the signs of religious extremism, punishable by a term in these detention camps. But I still keep my very vivid memories of those women, the very rich culture that they created. Many of them were very powerful figures, and I have enormous respect for their efforts at making community in a very tough environment. So all of this is to say that listening to these appalling revelations is very difficult for me, but it is not so surprising. Certainly news of this kind has been trickling out of the region for some time. I think it's something that many of us who are close to the situation preferred not to think about too much. It is very difficult for me to think about the women I got to know, to think about their daughters who played with my daughters when we stayed in the village, and what might have happened to them. I think that the seeds of this violence, this abuse, were really sown a long time ago. For years now, we academics have been writing about the position of minority women in China, the way that they're objectified, sexualized, pressed into the role of dancers, always smiling and welcoming visitors to their exotic home. And we've seen how this vision of minority women in various parts of China has been taken up by the tourist industry, and how in some areas this has spilled into prostitution. So all this then is the wider background to the revelations of systematic sexual violence in the camps. Let's think now about the immediate context, where since 2017, over 1.5 million people have been detained and subject to a system in which they have no rights at all. As Sairigul Saitbai has said, the police have unlimited power in these camps. And the inmates of the camps are systematically humiliated and dehumanized. And the inmates, they range from the village women who I knew so well to highly regarded academics. So my own colleague, Rahila Dawut, is amongst the detainees. So are some of her postgraduate students. We've heard recently a report from Kelbinur Siddiq of a special camp in Urumqi, in the regional capital, where students who studied abroad were kept, 10,000 young women with shaved heads, kept in crowded, unsanitary conditions, given unknown drugs and routinely abused. So I think really we should not be surprised that abuses occur in these contexts. As I've said, we've had individual reports of sexual violence in these camps committed against both men and women, I should say. And these have been trickling out over several years now. And each of these revelations has come at serious cost to those who dared speak out. I can't say how much I admire their courage. They have to overcome traditional notions of shame from within the community. And of course, they are targets for Chinese agents who harass them, accuse them of lying, threaten their families, accuse them of being paid US agents. By now, we've heard so many of these individual testimonies from women who saw or directly experienced sexual violence, who escaped Xinjiang and are now based in different countries around the world. We've heard their voices from Kazakhstan, from Sweden, Holland, France, Turkey, and the US. And I really think that the time is long gone where we can dismiss these accounts and say there's not enough evidence. Not only is this abuse happening, but it is clearly widespread across the camp system. And I think for it to be occurring on such a wide scale suggests that it must be condoned at a very high level. So in many parts of the world, we've seen sexual violence against women used as a weapon of war. There are parallels here, I think, with the experience of Bosnian women not so very long ago in Europe. In Xinjiang, we see this violence going hand in hand with other ways that Uyghur women are being targeted. So widespread reports of coerced marriage with Han Chinese men, and the clear evidence, as we've just seen, of enforced sterilization. All of this suggests a coordinated campaign, which in my view clearly falls within accepted definitions of genocide. So I think it really is time for us all, regardless of our gender, faith, or ethnicity, to consider how to respond to what's going on. Thank you.
Professor Rachel Harris, thank you for that. And of course, in recent months, the US government has ruled that they believe that China is committing genocide against the Uyghur people. Our next guest, Rahima Mahmut, is Uyghur herself. And Rahima, we heard there from Professor Rachel Harris about her experience of losing touch with those that she'd come to know during the course of her work. Of course, you have gone through the pain of losing touch with family and friends. And I wonder if you could give us your thoughts on the situation now facing the Uyghur population.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank Open Forum to organize this event. And thank you so much for Emma for chairing this event. And it is so, so important. Also, I would like to pay my tribute to those very brave survivors. We have now 7 or 8 Uyghur women: Mihrigul Tursun, Gulbahar Jalilova, Zumrat Davud, Sayragul Saidbay, Gulzera Avulkan Qizi, Tursunay Ziyavuddin, Qalbinur Siddiq, and Gulbahar Khaitwaji. I think people must remember their name, and the history must remember them. The sexual violence, as I said, I never surprised about when I even first heard about it, because even when I was in my country, when I was still living there, this sexual harassment, against Uyghur women is very widespread. But then at that time, the situation was very, very different. We still had protected in some way, and but now, since this camp network especially placed Uyghurs in an extremely vulnerable situation, like Qalbinur Siddiq said, is the sexual violence is not just in the camps. Because of this becoming relative, this program, it actually opened the kind of green lights for the Chinese men to rape Uyghur women. And she also described about her own ordeal, about her so-called relative when she stayed in her house. And she said initially he would stay about 5-6 days in like 3 months, and later it became more frequent. And she was okay because her husband was around, but it is very difficult to guarantee the women whose husband or other family members taken away to these camps. The very first horrific account that I heard firsthand was a lady called Ruqya, and she, we call her name Ruqya. She actually served prison for 4 years prior to this camp network, the concentration camps started. And she talked about her ordeal, about gang rape. And then the second personal account was in October last year, when we spoke to Gulzera Avulkan Qizi, and she revealed that she was forced to assist this crime. She said, I couldn't do anything about it. Literally, they left me against myself. I don't know how to say this. They are raising minority ethnic groups and turning them into Chinese by brainwashing them. They said that a good policy has come, but they forced me to go to that room with divorced women or widows. They forced me to take off those women's clothes and to restrain their hands and leave the room. And she said, I did a cleaning job for 6 months. One day I went to the room to mop the floor. There was a man, and I told him to move his feet on the floor. And he said, I paid to come here. It is up to me if I want to move my feet or not. And Sairagul's account even horrific, and she spoke about this open gang rape of a 20 or 21-year-old woman. And she said one day they assembled many people in a large hall. Then they brought a young girl, 20 to 21-year-old. She was forced to confess a bogus crime in front of everyone. She pleaded guilty to the maid of crime in flood of tears in her speech, in which she was forced to confess. After that, in front of so many people, the police raped her in turns. It was their way of testing those detainees, whether they have transformed, in other words, whether they have given up their humanity. While hearing the girl's painful plea, "Rescue me, please, help me, please," I felt died. I was dead. It was absolutely horrendous. I don't believe there is any other suffering that surpassed this. Since after Tursunay appeared on TV, the BBC news report revealing her own absolute horrific experience, interviewed her again recently, and she said, "I suffer from nightmares. I often wake up from nightmares that there are men in the darkness raping me. I have those nightmares every night." And for a woman who suffered from gang rape is an unspeakable shame. But if I don't speak up, I have siblings and their children, and our future generation are living there. And what is going to happen to our people, our women, and our children, bearing in mind of all those who are still suffering? I am prepared to make all sacrifices, and I am also aware that I have become a worthless person. And all these women who survived this camp and are now living abroad, they are damaged forever. And when she was asked, "What would you like to say to the world?" And this is what she said: "If there is a legal system in the world, I want to see that. I don't know whether it is Xi Jinping or everyone in his government. I don't know who formulated the policy. I wish them to be tried in court and held accountable. How many women like me have suffered their abuse? I am not the only one. Many of them are so young and innocent. I appeal to the world that it must not stand by idly. I wish to believe and hope that the world will act. This is all I wish to say." And this is all I wish to say as well.
Rahima, thank you very much for that. It seems an appropriate moment to bring in Baroness Kennedy there. We have a plea for the world to act, a plea for the justice systems of the world to step forward and attempt to deal with this situation. With your expertise, how do you think international and domestic law can actually get involved in this situation and try and bring some kind of legal accountability?
Let me start, Emma, by asking whether you can hear me, because I've been having trouble with technology. I wanted to start to you as a journalist for bringing attention to situation of women around the world, and you've been a great pioneer in your foreign coverage, particularly affecting women, and these issues are so important. What has been happening to the Uyghur women is part of something systemic, something that is an attack upon the whole Uyghur people, and for many communities, the whole business of talking about sexual assault, the interference with one's reproductive system, for women to be sterilized, to be forced into having abortions and so on, is very difficult to give voice to such events in your life. You've heard about the recurring nightmares of people who have been subjected to sexual violence. It's clear that the women are suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. The consequences of this on the individuals, but also on a people, is destructive, and indeed it's about a way of annihilating a people. The whole definitions of genocide under the Genocide Convention are that it's about not just the killing of people, but it's also about taking away from them their sense of identity, their culture, their religion, their way of being. It's about attacking fertility and the opportunity to reproduce and so on. And of course, you do that by systematic raping and so on, because of course, then people breathe in a sense of shame about their bodily, private experiences of intimacy. You also have the whole business of children being taken away from the women. Their children are being sent off to boarding schools to deracinate them, to actually have them forget about what they've learned about their faith or their culture, and to ensure that they can speak Chinese and that the Mandarin, and that they speak and learn the practices of the wider community. Now, that, as you just heard one of us say, that amounts to the definition of genocide. And the Genocide Convention was created after the Second World War. And those of us the nations that have signed up to this, and around the world nations have, are committing to preventing genocide. You're not supposed to just wait until after the event and to wring your hands and try to bring some people before a court. You're supposed to try to prevent it. And we have that obligation. We as a nation, but the nations of the world have the obligation to stop this. And we should be doing it. And the problem we've got is that the International Court of Justice, to which a nation can bring another nation that is doing this to a people, a veto can be exercised because China's on the Security Council, and that gives them a special way of preventing the investigation into these crimes. If they were to be brought before the international, if individuals were to be brought before the International Criminal Court, no doubt again, I mean, China's not a signatory, so there are going to be problems about that. So looking for legal remedies is very difficult. And it's why we in the United Kingdom have been looking at a way of introducing a new dimension to this, which is that under an amendment to our trade bill that's currently going through Parliament, it's being suggested that there should be a procedure in Britain whereby a matter of such grievousness as what is happening to the Uyghur Chinese can be brought before the British High Court for the judges to determine whether there has been a meeting of the tests, the legal tests, as to whether genocide is happening. Does the evidence reach the threshold, so that there is proof measured by judges who are experienced to do precisely that, to analyze and measure whether this terrible crime, the most grievous of all crimes, has taken place. So the British courts would not be able to punish or do anything. It would be about making a declaration. I think it would have an impact on the behavior and conduct of China, because I think it would be, we would immediately see a retreat from some of these behaviors and the conduct of the Chinese state, because I don't think they would want to be determined as being genocidal. But I also think it falls upon us as nations that if such a determination has been made, to consider our position with regard to policy, trading policy. Should we be trading with such a nation? The other piece of armory that now is being created is the armor of targeted sanctions, where we could, for example, identify those who are running these re-education camps, which are more like concentration camps, and ensure that if they have property in the United Kingdom, if they come and have visas to visit the United Kingdom, if they educate their children here, that should be stopped. that we target sanctions against those who are administering these policies, that we target the ministers who are responsible for these re-education places, as they call them, that we should be targeting the governor of this province, and that they should basically not be allowed to travel into democracies who hold firm on the rule of law and what the rule of law really means, and who believe in the protection of human rights, because this is a range of serious range of grievous human rights abuses.
And it's a good point here, I feel, to bring in Baroness Verma, because of course you are sitting in the Lords, Baroness Verma, and you've been very involved in the attempt to bring the amendment to the trade bill through in the past weeks, and the challenges that has faced. We heard there from Helena Kennedy about how difficult it is to bring international sanction. How do you feel the world can be encouraged to stop turning away from the plight of the Uyghur people?
Thank you, Emma. And first of all, I also want to join fellow panelists on thanking the Open Forum for bringing this debate today. It's a really important one. There are so many wider issues connected with this issue on the Uyghur community, and also the growth of China and its power across the globe. And I think when we do talk, and Helena just spoke about, sanctions and how we can stop trading, but the trade globally now is so interlinked with countries like China, who are massive economies. They are positioned in literally every single country on the planet. And in many cases, those countries are heavily indebted to China. So I think we've got to also be very, very practical and honest with ourselves in asking the question on, is it right that we allow a small group of countries to become so powerful that they can never really be strongly challenged enough? I mean, I'm really pleased that the UK government has led the first and second joint statements of the UN on Xinjiang in 2019 and 2020. And I know that in 2020 October, 38 other countries joined the UK in a robust statement at the UN's third committee. But 38 out of 190 plus countries, it's just a tiny spoon of people coming together. And if we're really, really going to challenge, I think the important thing is that we first and foremost get to understand what it is that we are able to do to hold account those countries that are systematically breaking rules to oppress one community under another. And this is a much wider issue for me. I mean, I have been an activist on the rights of women and girls for many, many years. And whether it's the Uyghur women in China, or the Yazidis, or the rape and sexual torture of young girls and women in countries where rape has been used as a weapon, I think we collectively have put the interests of our trade and our commerciability above the rights of ordinary women and girls on the ground, of ordinary poorer communities on the ground. And we have got to put a mirror to ourselves and ask ourselves, when will this stop? I mean, COVID, interestingly enough, COVID has lifted a lid on so many issues. And part of those issues has been the impact of having absolute devastation socially and economically on the consequences on women and girls across the world. And therefore, this is an opportunity for us to have those real, serious, honest debates. The Foreign Secretary in the UK has made it clear that he will continue as the Foreign Secretary and the government of the UK to put pressure on the Chinese to ask them how they are going to respond to the allegations of forced birth control, this sort of systematic torture, as those poor women in the first initial videos that we saw this evening. But also beyond that, it's really about what do we then do to make sure we put into place enough measures that wherever those women and girls feel threatened and are under pressure to either have forced birth control put upon them, or forced sexual predatory put upon them, or anything that is against their will. How do we make sure that, whether it's the UN or whether it's the other many organizations across the globe, work collectively together? I'm hoping, the UK holds the presidency of the G7, and I'm hoping that when everybody is coming together and having deep, meaningful conversations about some of the issues that have been raised here today, but beyond this, and for me, it is much, much further than what we're having today. The survivors are out there. They will still need lifelong services to help them get through the trauma that they have gone through. But there are many, many, many tens of thousands of women across the world who are not in that position. And we need to be able to, break this silence of thinking that, our commercial economics is above everything, and that we will carry on being engaging with those countries whose human rights activities are so below acceptable, that we need to start standing up. And Helena made a very good point about, let's look at the officials, let's look at those people who administer these conditions in their countries, and let's see what we can do there. But it's not going to solve the bigger, wider issue, and that is of having too much power condensed into too small a number of countries that hold their power over the rest of the globe. And I think, we have got to start resetting, and this is why I come back to the COVID issue. COVID has enabled us to think much wider than our individual countries, because the response has been global. Maybe the responses to the issues that we're talking about today may come to the fore because we're willing to make them a global issue rather than looking at them in siloed lenses, where we think one solution will be okay for this, but another solution must be found for something somewhere else. I think it's an issue of the rights of women and girls, and I think that collectively needs to be responded to.
Baroness Verma, thank you very much for your thoughts there. Now, we have time for some questions that you've been sending in through the streams upon which you're watching our discussion this evening. So if I bring the whole panel back in now, and Baroness Verma spoke there about the trauma of those who have been caught in these camps and caught in so many of these communities around the world. The first question comes from Sachin Sharma, and I think it's probably appropriate that it goes to Rahima, because he asks about the trauma experienced by some of those featured in the BBC report. And Rahima, you were very involved in that report, so let's hear the question and perhaps you could respond.
Hello. Just out of concern, all those women who have opened up to BBC, are they okay? Hope there has been no terrible consequences to them or their families.
A very, very good question. I spoke to Qalbinur Siddiq this morning, because I learned that she has been harassed since she appeared on that, revealed the story again on BBC. And just a few hours ago, I spoke to her, and she said she received a video call this morning from the local police. She even screenshot that, and she wanted to reveal, because they said, if you continue, your brothers, your sisters, your family is here. And that this is a kind of situation that people, anyone who, have families back home, and if they cannot do anything to you, but they use your own family and threaten you with that. So it's a very common thing. But these women, they decided that there is no any other way out. There is no any other way to save our nation, save our people, or save our own family. By just being silent is not going to save anything. And therefore, they are at risk. And if they are safe in the country where they are living, but the mind, they're still suffering from this trauma and also worries. So they need a lot of help. I think we need to offer, really need a lot of help.
Indeed, so Rahima, thank you for that. Our next question comes from Vivekanand Ahuja, and the question relates to the whole issue of why it's taken so long to bring any kind of justice. We'll play the question now, but perhaps this is one for you, Baroness Kennedy.
This has clearly been going on for so long. Why have the UN and other organizations like these not been able to do anything?
Genocide. There's a real problem. Feel that a genocide is what is taking place towards the Uyghur. As Baroness Verma has said, is that the UN was created after the Second World War over 70 years ago now, and Security Council, the nations who were made part of this sort of small cohort at the time, now. And I agree with Baroness Verma, there needs to be reform. I would like to see the end of the Security Council. I think it served its purpose after the war, but it should be done away with now. The difficulty with that, though, is, as Baroness Verma said, too many nations in the world now are indebted to China. And so they're not going to vote the sort of council. But that is a long job. The most pressing job just now is how do we end the terrible events that we've heard described by Rahima, and of course it is a problem because everybody wants to trade with China, a massive population, that massive consumers who might buy our goods. So we have put, as Baroness Verma said, unfortunately, when we talk about the abuse of women and girls, the abuse of people worldwide, definitely, enemies are to the balance, and our trading relations tend to take priority over those human rights abuses. It's a really difficult square to circle or circle to square. It's very, very hard. But I think that having mentioned quietly in discussion of diplomacy, we meet with leaders of states and sort of saying, we're not happy about what you're doing to the Uyghur. That's not enough. You have to take it to where it bites. And so we have to, and I actually do think that for the Chinese people and for the Chinese leadership, shaming is very important. To actually have the accusation and the evidence put out in a court of law. And law does matter. Having it placed before a court, it matters. And for a British court, for example, that a genocide is taking place, would be a very, very serious consideration for the Chinese. And I think that it would pull them to the around what is it that they're to be doing, and they should be these re-educations, ending this business of putting limits on the on people having children, which is a serious abuse of human rights, and allowing people to have their religious freedom and not to use as a fig leaf that you're preventing terrorism. We all in all of our nations have to deal with the minority, a real minority who commit. The Uyghur as a whole are not doing that in China. And so that is an excuse that's being used in the world. It should not be allowed to cover up what it are crimes. And so I'm afraid we have to think of alternatives. And the only way that you're going to create change is by actually, I think, having a court of law, the International Court of Justice. Let's take it to our domestic courts here in the United Kingdom, in Canada, in Germany. Let us have lawyers and judges look at the evidence and make determinations. And I think that you might find that China will become a more willing participant in the idea of change.
Thank you for that. Baroness
I
Verma,
want justice.
Sorry, we've got a technical glitch there. Thank you again for that. Baroness Verma, we're getting a lot of questions about the role of the UN in all of this. Christine Nix says that the assaults are obviously systematic, so can the UN do anything? We also have a video question from Joel. Perhaps I could ask you to listen to it and then respond to both if you would.
At a time when the UK needs business from all over, and China being a huge investor and market, will business get in the way of the genocide bill?
Thanks, Joel, and thanks, Christina. I think there lies the big problem. I think, you know, and I have genuinely worried about the rise of just a few countries having so much power over the economies of so many countries. And I think, you know, until we start really addressing the imbalances of poor countries against very, very wealthy countries, and start looking at how we make sure that no one country is able to have so much influence at the table, I'm afraid, you know, trying to have really serious, meaningful discussions where the person on the other side is going to take much notice of you is going to be very, very difficult. And I bring this up simply because I think over the years, we've allowed ourselves to be taken over in wanting to have everything done from cheaper and from somewhere else, rather than build up our own communities, our own countries, strengthening the countries where the resources are in abundance, but the technology and the know-how isn't there. And I think that a lot of this is incumbent upon all of those countries in the East and the West that have enabled this to happen. So I think, you know, we can ask for quick solutions. There's none coming. And we have to be very brutally honest about that. There are no easy solutions coming. And, you know, if there is a country that can ignore sanctions or ignore you because they are so powerful, then what do you have left? And I think engagement, dialogue, making sure that people remain at the table, but strengthening other institutions and other countries is going to be key to this. You know, I mean, I know our Foreign Secretary has spoken to his counterpart in China around the Uyghur community issue. I know he's been very forthright and very strong in his concerns that he's raised. He's brought on board 38 other nations, but there are so many more nations to be brought on board. And the UN institutions themselves, I mean, you know, they were generated for a reason. Every organization comes to a point where it really needs to have a real good look at itself. Is it functioning the way it should be functioning? Has it got the teeth that it has to have? And are those countries that are within it committed to actually then delivering on behalf of all the world rather than just a few special interests?
Thank you for that. Professor Rachel Harris, it seems a very long time since we heard from you at the start of our debate, and we heard there that there was no such thing, or there is no such thing as a quick fix to this. You've been studying for 2 decades now this situation. Can I ask you to watch the next clip and give us your view on it? It is from Devendra Kumar Singh, who's an ex-associate professor at Delhi University.
How could the cry of silence be converted into the roar of silence?
Well, perhaps I can. It's great to see that engagement there from Delhi. I take that to speak to the question of hope. Really, what can we do as perhaps ordinary people? You know, I mean, it's very good to hear about the possibilities for the role of law. I'm somewhat less optimistic about the possibilities for the roles of governments around the world, given the importance of trade. But I would like to put a word in for just the importance of ordinary people and grassroots campaigns, which can really mobilize a great deal of energy and can indeed, you know, put quite a lot of pressure on big companies and on governments. So, you know, we've seen quite effective campaigns going on to raise awareness about the use of cotton taken from Xinjiang under conditions of forced labor. That has involved some quite complex research in order to establish the supply lines. But, you know, we've had enough clarity on that now. It's been taken to some of the big fashion companies and they have responded, you know. So I think that kind of thing really gives me hope. And I would like to see more energy devoted to that. You know, whenever I feel personally discouraged, in despair, I do draw hope from the number of young people, especially, who are coming to me and saying, you know, what can we do? And those voices from those young people are coming from everywhere, you know, from Europe, from the United States, and also from China. A lot of young people from China really, you know, caring about these issues and engaging and asking what they can do. So I think it's really important to keep up the energy, keep raising awareness and get involved with these targeted campaigns. You know, we've just heard today, for example, about the use of surveillance technology developed in China and used against the Uyghur people, which has been bought by London councils, local councils, for example. So, you know, there's a nice little local issue for us to get our teeth into. There's always these things coming up.
Thank you for that. This is a question that we've just had sent in, and I'll open it to the whole panel for review. The question is that although the whole world seems to be talking about this issue, does the panel think that there is enough talk coming from the Islamic world to try and tackle the problem? Feel free, whoever wants to go with the answer for that.
Okay, let me address this the best I can, and I'm sure Rachel has things to say about this as well. Well, no, sadly, we don't have enough people or government from the Islamic world. But the reason being already discussed, economic power of China and its diplomatic power. And so how we can make this Islamic world to stand up for Uyghurs. And that is something that we need to really look at very seriously. Is there any way, I mean, I represent World Uyghur Congress and work as a UK project director. We have been reaching out, but it has been tough. But I'm not saying that Muslim people not supporting. There are a huge number of Muslims around the world, and MPs in this country are speaking up very, very loudly. but I don't know how we can break through, the countries, Islamic countries.
Rahima, thank you. So that is all we have time for in this evening's open forum. So thank you to you all for joining us this evening, and also to all our contributors. The next open forum will be on March the 4th. It will be on hunger in Britain, so a very different subject. That will be at 3 o'clock UK time. But before we go, the real thanks of this evening has got to go to all of those who were brave enough to speak in the reports you heard, and all of those who are working with Uyghur women and the wider Uyghur population to try and raise this issue. It is very clear from everything we've heard tonight that there will be no quick fix to this solution, and that there will continue to be a lack of real emphasis on the subject by governments across the world. But I think what we can say tonight, thanks to those who have been brave enough to speak out, is that nobody could ever claim that they didn't know what accusations were being made by those who are suffering.